My guest on the program this week is author Joel Eisner, who's just released an updated and expanded edition of a book he started many years ago with Vincent Price called The Price of Fear, the film career of Vincent Price. Joel, how did this project all come together?
Well, that actually goes back to 1985 when I was writing the official Batman Batbook, which was the official book on the 1966 TV show in which he was the villain Egghead.
That's right.
And I had always wanted to do a book with Vincent because he had so many stories I had heard over the years. And there really wasn't any real good biography or films of book on him at that time. But he wanted to wait until the Batman book had come out to see how good it turned out and everything was printed properly and see how he came out. But in the interim, I was in contact with him. I had his home number. And I'm in New York, and he was in California, so most of our relationship was strictly long distance. So I used to call him at the house every so often. He was very receptive. He was one of those people that you could approach any time if he wasn't busy. And except when we got interrupted by his wife a few times, I remember. But we were talking late, because I used to call him about 8 o'clock his time, which was 11 mine, so I wasn't disturbing, but once in a while she called him for a late dinner. He goes, Vincent, time for dinner. He goes, I gotta go. But he did have a problem, which I didn't know at the time, because he was already starting to feel the effects of the Parkinson's.
Right.
And eventually the lung cancer that got him a few years later. But there's also he was slowing down a bit as far as his work control and stuff, and what he was doing. And so like a year before he left us, I got a letter from him saying that he was wishing me well with the project, but his health is just enough for him just to get himself around, he said, around his own house, than to bother, working on the project. So he wished me well everything I had to do, and I wound up having to complete it myself. So it's a full-length biography of him, but it's told through his film work and his television work and his theater work and all his anecdotal stories. So far, so good with the project. I mean, we're getting good reviews, and just a matter of letting people know this thing is out there, because so many people, I'm sorry to say, have starting to forget.
Yeah, that's true.
I'll tell you funny, I was recommended to quite a contact the Imus in the Morning program.
Right.
Not so much maybe get on his show, but because he's got that book club he has and he recommends books and things. So I finally got in touch with someone who got me in touch with his personal assistant. And I spoke to her, and she said she's going to make sure he gets the information about the book. So I'm talking to her. I said, are you familiar who Vincent Price is? She goes, vaguely. It's a matter of who remembers it.
Yeah. Well, I talk to a lot of guests, and we sort of bemoan what happened to television, that it really started to change, I think, in the mid-'80s. Because when I was growing up, his movies were on every Sunday afternoon, on WOR, and and I would always see them, and then somewhere. I don't know if you remember how far back these were up, but they first premiered most of the Poe pictures on CBS late night in the early 70s. I used to. I'll be 54 in a couple of weeks, but so for me, the 4:30 movie on Channel 7, and every movie channel we had were movies, late night movies, the ABC late night movies, CBS, NBC. Everyone had a movie. All the time. So I got to see everything that was on, from the Chiller Theater to Creature Features to every other thing that was on, and it was all the 30s and 40s. And that stuff, the stuff at that time wasn't all that old as it is now. It's true.
You're looking at Frankenstein. I remember watching in 1969, they were running Son of Frankenstein for the first time. That was made in 39, so it's only a 30-year difference. Now, you're looking at another 40-something years to that, maybe more.
And when cable came along, I used to think, well, who needs cable? I mean, I've got all the movies in the world I want to see. And then, of course, they all went away. And now, a lot of these DVDs, they don't even show up in stores. They have Warner Archives. They're like mail-order DVDs. And
they're private pressing. So basically what you're going to get is the film and no trailers, no extras, no nothing.
Right.
And you're still paying $20.
Yeah.
I had a couple of those when some of the things he did. A few of his pictures have turned out that way to get them. And there's still some of the films I've never seen. Like, there's a movie that I'm surprised has never turned up anywhere. Well, actually, I take it back. There was a station in New Jersey back in the 70s, WBTB, used to be the Metco Home Network, Channel 68.
Mm-hmm.
ran this movie. They had a package. They used to run the whole bunch of old Universal stuff. It's a picture called Curtain Call at Cactus Creek. He made it in 1950 with Donald O'Connor, Walter Brennan, Eve Arden, a few other people I can't remember. It was a comedy western set in the 1900s. And he was playing a crazy Shakespearean actor on that whole bunch of true full of actors on the train. That was the only time I've ever seen a movie ever run anywhere.
Right.
And that doesn't show up. He's got a few pictures that don't even turn to 3 o'clock in the morning on Turner Classics that exist, but they don't run.
Was there anything that you were shocked to find out when you were talking to Vincent about his career?
Shocked to find it? Well, first of all, I never found one person who didn't like him. That's one thing. He could make friends with anybody. He had a very uneventful life. He never got involved in any real scandals or anything. I mean, he was married 3 times. He's got 2 children.
Right. One
from his first wife and from his second wife. So, I mean, he was a family man. He had dogs. He had, he went fishing. He normally had a regular life. But he sold out because, this is what I was getting to the shocking part, people who were trained like him in the theater, who everyone thought he was British, that was the other part of this thing. He was born in St. Louis, Missouri. He has no accent whatsoever, but he referred to it as having an English veneer for making so many pictures over there.
Right.
But he came from a middle-class family, upper-middle-class family. He came from a candy company, actually. His father was the president of the National Candy Company. And they make jawbreakers and other things. And his grandfather invented baking powder.
Huh.
And he sold it to the Royal Company years later. But he's a direct descendant of the first child born on the Mayflower.
Wow.
Peregrine White. And that was from his father's side of the family, the White family. His father's mother's, actually, so that was her maiden name. And he always said that if they ever found out, if they had known that he was going to be a descendant years later, they would have thrown the kid overboard. He was born on the ship the day they landed in Plymouth Rock. So he goes way back to one of the founding families of this country. So it was all very interesting things about him. But eventually, people like that, when movies changed in the 40s and the 50s, and he said you got people in there like Marlon Brando and Jimmy Dean and James Dean, and people who mumbled and method acting and all this other stuff. People who were classically trained all went into costume pictures. That's why you had things like the Three Musketeers, or he did a number of things. He played kings. He did other stuff in these movies. And then eventually he got involved with the horror pictures because he was good at being a villain. And then from that, it was like Boris Karloff. Boris Karloff was probably one of the nicest guys I heard you could ever meet. Very cultured. Real name was William Pratt, born in England. And Peter Cushing, the same thing. All these British actors, or all these foreign actors who were in the horror film pictures, were completely opposite of everything they played.
Right, of course.
They call them the boogeymen, but they were doing everything they possibly could to kill the image. That's what Vincent did. He got involved with House of Wax, and then the William Castle pictures, then the Poe pictures, and then the Dr. Fives movies, and things of that nature. But all the time he would go the opposite direction. He would be on the Red Skelton. Red Skelton was one of his best friends. And he was constantly on the Red Skelton show. He was on with Jack Benny. He was on with, he did Bob Hope pictures. He did Lucy. He did anything he could do to kill his image as the horror thing by sending everything up. Batman to him was a godsend because he was in the middle of doing all these Poe pictures. Now we had a chance to play a comedy villain.
Right.
And that's really, what you learn about him. The guy was a gourmet cook. He wrote cookbooks. He was an expert on wines. He was an art expert. Everything completely cultured. You would not think all these crazy villains he played. And he really wasn't so much a crazy villain, I say like Bela Lugosi was doing his Mad Doctor pictures.
Right.
Vincent's characters were more characters of circumstance. The Fly, Return of the Fly, The House on Haunted Hill, and The Tingler was what made him the king of the horror pictures before the Poe film.
Right.
Those 4 pictures. And not one of them was he ever the villain. The Fly.
That's true.
He was the Fly's brother.
Right.
David Hedison was the Fly. In the sequel, which took place, 10, 15 years later, which was made a year later, he's still playing the brother of the Fly, only now he's the uncle because the son is now the Fly.
Right, right.
So he's not the villain in that one. House on Haunted Hill, he was the host of the whole goings on, but it turns out the killers was his wife and her boyfriend, the psychiatrist, and
right.
They were trying to bump him off. He just trying to defend himself. And in The Tingler, he's the doctor who discovers the Tingler, but he's nothing to do with the title character. That's that little worm thing that was in the film. So for 4 pictures, He had nothing to do with being the villain. In fact, in most of it, he's actually been something of a, I would say, not quite a hero, but he was basically, the good guy in the film.
I think of another one, and this one might be more well-known only because the film is in public domain and it shows up on all these, various horror collections. That's The Last Man on Earth. You're right. In that one, he's he's kind of the hero in that movie, too.
He was. That film, I'm not 100% sure it's public domain because it was co-produced by WFDU, and the copyright has been renewed on it, but it was made in Italy, so there's maybe some loose thing going on with the rights and stuff, because I remember when I spoke to Sam Arkoff from AIP, the producer, he said that when they made the Omega Man, which was the first remake of the film, Charlton Heston, they had to come to them for the licensing rights to do the picture. In the House of Usher, let's say, he was there was a curse on the house, and he was suffering from the hypersensitivity to food, to sound, to whatever the circumstances were. And the pendulum, his father in the film was the original Grand Inquisitor from the Spanish Inquisition. And his wife is trying to drive him crazy so she can run off with her boyfriend. But his mind snaps, and he turns into his own father and starts torturing everybody in the pit.
Right.
Again, he's a victim of circumstance. Everything he's done has been something not really... he's underpossessed of the ghosts of his wives. He's... even House of Wax. He was a victim. He was a mild-mannered, wax sculptor of the museum, and he gets caught in the fire, and it warped his brain. And he became this crazy killer because of the trauma he went through. A lot of circumstances. Even his Dr. Fives characters. He turned into Dr. Fives because he got caught in a car crash and burned on his way to his wife was in an accident, and he blamed the doctors for killing her. And he took his revenge on all the doctors. But he himself, that whole skeletal look of his face, was due to an accident. He was on his way back to rush to his wife. And again, once you get into these accidents, your mind warps and you become crazy. And evil, differentiated characters, but they all have senses of humor, which all his characters always had.
So, sympathetic.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the...
Sympathetic, and his characters always had a very dry but devilish sense of humor to them.
Right, yep.
There's always a chuckle somewhere in his character that you can always find something humorous happening.
I have to ask you about two pictures in particular.
Yeah, sure.
These are not great movies by any stretch of the imagination, but they happen to be favorites of mine, one more than the other, but I'm just curious what if Vincent Price talked about the Dr. Goldfoot movies.
Oh, God. You probably like the first one more than the second one.
Of course, the first, sure.
The first one, I didn't speak much about that one, but it was a chance to do some kind of comedy bits. He did that right in between, right around the time he was doing Batman. The second one he hated.
Sure.
That one, by that time, AIP had a long-standing contract with a producer in Italy. I got a lot of this stuff from Sam Arkoff, who told me these things. And he said that that particular film, they wanted to do a picture with Mario Bava, who was the big Italian director of science fiction horror pictures in Italy. He did Black Sabbath, and he did Black Sunday, these pictures, and he was very known for being a photographer and stuff. And they brought him in as a director, and they said, well, we're going to bring this over to Italy, save some money. Because they wanted to cut back. They were already doing pictures in England. The Italian studio was going to pick up half the cost of everything, so they'll do it over there. And the mistake that they made, and I have the Italian version of this picture. It's longer than the American version because there's more footage of the two comedians.
I don't know if that's good or bad.
No. No, Ciccio and...
the Italian Abbott and Costello.
The two Abbott and Costello. And they basically... It was almost like they wrote the picture for them and they stuck Vincent's character into the film.
Right.
It took away from everything else. But the biggest thing that Vincent hated about the picture, he said, was that he had to play a dual part in the film at the last minute. The actor that they hired to play one of the other people he had kidnapped, some general, I remember in the uniform he was wearing, never showed up for work. So at the last minute, they made him a look-alike to Dr. Goldfoot. They gave him an eye patch, and they changed his costume and everything else. And he had to play two parts back and forth on that picture. And he wasn't prepared for it. They had to use cue cards, I believe. I think he told me.
Right.
So it was a very bad experience as far as working on that film for him. It didn't make as much money for them either, and that was the end of the series. There is a third version, though, if you've ever seen the Shindig episode.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
The Wild World of Dr. Goldfoot. It's actually on the DVD. They released it.
On the for the first movie or the second movie?
No, the second one never came out on DVD.
Oh, okay, because I have it on VHS.
No, the first DVD, they came out with a few years ago. Supposedly that special is on there.
Oh, okay.
The second film has never been released on DVD for some reason.
See, I was a fan of that, not because I'm just a fan of Vincent Price, but because Susan Hart was in that. She's kind of the lead.
Susan Hart.
Girl bomb,
married,
I guess.
Well, she was married to
Nicholson.
James Nicholson.
Yep.
The head of AIP. And you ever see her earlier picture before she married him? The Slime People?
Yeah, yeah.
I love that film.
Oh, she and the Ghost in the Invisible Bikini. That's later on, but
that one was actually done to save the picture. Call-up came in at the last minute. That whole footage of him as Hiram Stokely, the dead guy talking to the ghost. That whole thing was edited to make the picture longer because it wasn't long enough. They didn't have a story for it. A couple of pictures that I like of Vincent's myself, which are horrible pictures, but he's got some great stuff in it. There's a picture he made in the 70s with Sam Waterston, a remake of Journey into Fear, the old Orson Welles film.
Oh, yeah, okay.
The film itself, I didn't care if it was made in Canada with international crew and cast and all that other stuff. He's got a great death scene in that picture. And I think for me, it's my favorite death scene of him. Waterston shoots him with a flare gun, and he bursts into sparks. It's like something out of Voyage of Mama Sea when they're shooting him and he just bursts into flames, and because he's wearing a trench coat, and he just comes right out of the trench coat, and it just sort of explodes.
Right.
Because one of the things I have in my book is I like to do a lot of different lists. I have a little matching game I put in. The many different ways Vincent has died in his films. You've got to match the death scene to the movie. He's been shot, burned, stabbed, axed. A couple of odd ones. He drowned in a sewer in one of them, in the Confessions of an Opium Eater, which was a horrible film.
Right. What would you consider his best work? What's your personal favorite?
First of all, I should point out my favorite picture was The House on Haunted Hill.
Right.
I saw that when I was 6, and that was on Channel 9. I never forgot it. Actually, the scariest part in the picture of me was the old blind woman in the basement.
Yeah.
But that one always a little got me. But I love that one. I love of the Poe pictures. I would probably have to go to Mask of the Red Death.
Uh-huh.
I like that one. Everyone seems like Pit and the Pendulum, but I like the Mask of the Red Death. It was the first one they did in England. It was a good cast, and the whole thing just sort of worked. I love the one that's not a Poe picture, which was the Comedy of Terrors.
Right.
It's actually like even better than I like The Raven, because in that one you have all four of them working together: Rathbone, Koloff, and Peter Lorre with Vincent. Because The Raven, they were sort of split back and forth. But the routine between all of them in the Comedy of Terrors, they just play so well off each other.
Where would people get your book? Where can they go?
Just about anywhere. I mean, right now there aren't too many bookstores left in this world.
Yeah, that's true, unfortunately.
But I'm on every major book website, from Amazon to Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. You can go to the publisher's website. They have some interesting things that they're offering there, some tie-ins. We had some poster reproductions of a few of Vincent's films, and we had some T-shirts and other items. That's blackbedsheetbooks.com. But the book's available any place. Like I said, you just put in the price of fear and you'll find it.